All right, thank you for joining me. I'm Pastor J. Dillon Proctor. This is the Nazarene Stream Preacher, and I just put up a program about withholding communion. And this is largely about some Catholic bishops who have gotten together, and a large number of Catholic bishops, by the way, to withhold communion from Joe Biden and other abortion endorsing and advancing politicians. And while I had a whole program on that, there's a whole nother side about this that I want us to talk about, because there's a reason why so many people don't want this to happen, including people in the church. One of the scams that's been going on for a long time within the church, and really just in a lot of sectors of American culture, is this lie that says those who speak nice, like Joe Biden, are nicer, they're better, they're more Christian than someone like Trump simply because he speaks rough. We have seen this so many times. People who speak rough, they're bad and have to be sent away. Those who speak nicely, they are by default better. Now, what's crazy about this is that we've seen the people who speak nicely do just crazy corruption, huge amounts of evil, time and time again, even lying while they're speaking nicely. But as long as they do it in a nice tone, they get away with it, because nobody reacts to the nice words as if they're bad and sinful, as long as they're said nicely. Now, again, just using the illustrations of Trump and Biden, that doesn't mean that Trump is somehow saintly because he speaks rough. But the core premise that those who speak nicely are better than those who speak roughly is one of the biggest canards and scams that has been worked over in American politics. And if the Catholic Church comes forwards and officially rebukes somebody like Joe Biden and says you cannot have communion, that puts a huge wrench in that lie. There's no longer that fig leaf to hide behind that says, oh, those who speak nicely are better than others, because it recognizes that despite the nice words said out in public, the real evil of advancing evil that goes on, not always behind closed doors, a lot of times out in public, but it's just done in a nice tone, that indeed is horrendous evil. And it's not even a biblically founded argument, because you looked out the Old Testament, I just got done reading 1 Kings 18, where Elijah the prophet goes up against the worshipers of Baal. He's pretty harsh to him. He mocks them. He speaks roughly with them. Paul speaks very roughly with people, very crudely with people. Jesus says some pretty harsh things to people. Get behind me, Satan. He calls people broods of vipers. We find throughout Scripture, including Jesus himself, people talking rough about people, and this whole idea that, you have to be somehow super nice all the time is the mark of biblical living. That's just not true. But we've somehow bought into that canard and scam here in our modern day and age. But if the Catholic Church does this, then all the journalists out there who may not confess Christ at all, but they like to, whenever an election or something comes around, purport, well, this person is in good standing with the church. They're so much more Christian. How could you ever vote for the rough-speaking people when you have this sort of, Christian man over here? If they do this, then that tears down the whole canard, the whole scam, that those who speak nice are more moral than those who speak rough. That scam is tore down if they do this, because it will expose the truth that a lot of people who speak nicely do wicked things. They're like Psalm 94:20. They frame mischief by law. They talk smooth while they do it. The devil also talks smooth in the garden. But it exposes the smooth talkers is what it does. So I've already discussed a lot of things about this. I just wanted to throw out that addendum because it's a really important point to make. People don't want to let go of that idol. They don't want to let go of that fraudulent line of thinking that says those who talk nicely are therefore nicer. They don't want to let go of that. They don't want that to fall away, because there's not a lot of real substance behind that. When it comes to something like the issue of abortion, there's really no case to be made for it if you're a critical thinker. You always have to deflect. When somebody says, do you think a 15-week-old unborn baby is a human? You have to say, oh, are you asking me about women's health care? You never can address it head on, because there's no substance there. There's no real meat there. if you talk about things truthfully, if you use synonyms, if you actually gather different angles and viewpoints on it, you will quickly find that, well, the unborn child is indeed a full human made fully in the image of God. They're developing, certainly, but they have their own DNA. They're fully made in the image of God. And, whatever we do as people, we are our brother's keeper. And in the case of mothers, by the natural law and moral law, they are the keeper of their children while they're in their womb. Their autonomy is attached now to the autonomy of their children. It's a significant responsibility. Whether or not you chose that, it has been placed upon you. You don't always get to choose the talents entrusted to us. We don't get to choose when we're born. We don't get to choose how tall we are, what our hair looks like, all these details. But we do get to choose what we do with what's charged to us. And motherhood is one of those things where if you're actually in the confines of God's natural law and God's moral laws, then in marriage, then you're going to be pretty well, expecting pregnancies when they happen. But also, even in the event of unplanned pregnancies, that still doesn't negate the fact that that's a child. And the addendum to my earlier conversation is, people don't want the canard to fall that those who speak nice are nicer. People like to feel the warm fuzzies and say, well, they talked nice, therefore I can just turn a blind eye to the evil that's going on. We've done this with electing pastors in the church. We've picked people who oftentimes speak nicer rather than being spiritually mature, and that's like one of the most amazing things that's been revealed to me over the last year. Speaking nice and speaking professionally is not a sign of spiritual maturity. It's not. It's actually a sign of spiritual immaturity when you're afraid to confront things, you're afraid to address things for what they are. It's like a parent that doesn't have the discipline to discipline their own children. That's an immature thing. It's not actually reaching that place of parenthood as it should. And we've preferred people on the news, people that are politicians that speak nicely and professionally. They have those hushed tones, but in fact, they're promulgating and perpetuating a lot of evil. And just wrapping up my point one more time, one of the sides of this, the reason why you see so many journalists out there that are suddenly concerned about communion, suddenly concerned about, well, what should the church be doing? Should the church do this or not? Suddenly they're concerned about how the church administers its business. Well, one of the reasons why is they don't actually have a lot of arguments on that side of the aisle with things like abortion, and they need people to not be asking for arguments. They need people to be listening in on the emotions that said, well, they speak nice, therefore they must be. And if the church exposes that that's a fraud, if the church comes out and says, no, we recognize that sin over there and we're calling it out, if there's out in the open evidence, official rebukes of sin that cannot be ignored, well, then they're out in the open and they cannot be ignored. And people want to ignore that. They don't like to see sin called out by the church. All right, so there's my little addendum to this conversation. I hope that we've been able to arrive at some places of critical thinking. May God bless you. God love you, and have a blessed day.